Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I began working at the State Air Pollution Control Agency in 1980, and one of the first plants I went into was a crumb rubber synthetic plant. Okay, so I knew about the styrene butadiene rubber and the carbon black, the aromatic extender oil. So I'm very familiar with the horribly toxic chemistry of crumb rubber. So I think those are extremely interesting, revelations about how it's used. Anyway, in the Baytown case, ExxonMobil is not really explaining what they call their advanced recycling claim. Okay, but first, the next slide, please. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. Well, so in these communities that I was around for 12 years, and I've been around for 32 years with Sierra Club in Texas, Louisiana, and many other places, these are really not just environmental justice communities, they are sacrifice zones. Okay. What I discovered is that there were very high cancer rates, a lot of lung problems, children sick going to the schools in the areas. And I heard this from the black mothers near these plants, and the problems in these communities is really it's mind-boggling, but it's very serious. From the production of plastics and the pollution that results from it. Next slide. Now, Exxon Baytown is in the Houston area, and on the far right of this picture, this is basically the 23-mile-long Houston Ship Channel. And these are industrial communities, and ExxonMobil's Baytown complex is on the far right there. It's an enormous complex that's well over a mile and a half long. The next slide zooms in on it a little bit. Can you go? Yeah. So there you see, kind of in the middle of the Exxon Baytown complex, and it's two big chemical plants and a refinery. And I've been in it, and it's a lot of pollution coming out of many stacks and flares. And then to the left, right of the community, right of the plant, you'll see where the communities are around the Baytown area. They're to the east, the northeast, the southeast, and but the pollution doesn't just stop at Exxon Baytown. Okay, it goes way down. The next slide, please, shows that there's a big refinery to the southern part of the plant. There's a large chemical complex, and then ethylene crackers where they're cracking ethane gas to ethylene to then send to a polymers plant and make polyethylene. Anyway, this pollution doesn't just stop at Baytown. It drifts all the way down through these ship channel communities, these sacrifice zones, and into Houston. Okay, and sometimes coming into Houston at night, I would be over 20 miles from these ship channel plants, and I could smell it miles and miles away. Next slide, please. This is the largest polluter in Harris County or Houston, Texas. Next slide, please. So I want to focus on the air pollution problems with these plastics manufacturing plants. Number one, there's very large amounts of air pollution, which most people aren't aware of. Some of it's legal, some of it's illegal. Secondly, I will not go into this much, but there's a lot of hazardous waste that is emitted. Well, it's not put into the air, but they have to treat it through the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA. But these plants make a lot of toxic waste regulated under RCRA. They also use a tremendous amount of water because they're making steam, and I'm not going to cover that. Finally, the concern I'll look at is the transparency is grossly missing in ExxonMobil's recycling claim. The next slide, please. So there, as I pointed out, the air pollution is a tremendous problem in these plants. They put out, we don't really know the accurate numbers. There's a lot of monitors on these plants, but then there's a lot of pollution that's not well monitored at all, that they use engineering estimates. So the numbers we get every year, these inventories are not very good. The plants have a lot of upsets, and some are reported, some are not reported. The next slide, please. So anyway, in 2010, Sierra Club and another group, Environment Texas, filed suit in federal court against ExxonMobil and the whole Baytown complex, the two chemical plants and the refinery. 16,000 violations of the Clean Air Act just in 5-year look back that is allowed under a citizens enforcement suit. We were able to sue because both EPA and the state of Texas were not doing their job, my former agency, which is no surprise. So we went into federal court, and the next slide, the violations covered what are called emission events. Basically, they're pooping in the air at excess rates, illegal amounts, even though even a lot of their legal pollution is pretty bad. The next slide is a quick overview of the next slide. Yeah. So this is what we were finding in their own records that had been reported to the state of Texas. A lot of sulfur dioxide, over 2 million pounds, volatile organic compounds. It would be like benzene, which is down below, as you can see. And 1,3-butadiene is a carcinogen along with benzene. Hydrogen sulfide is a very toxic gas that comes out of sour crude oil. So a lot of that came from the refinery. One of the stories in this case is we had a family that had moved from New York City to Baytown to work in the Houston area. Well, they got gassed by one area of the plant, and it was hydrogen sulfide. It smells like rotten eggs, and they had to take their 3 children to the hospital. We were counting on them as being one of the families in this legal case, although this was not personal injury or toxic tort. This was just alleging violations of the Federal Clean Air Act and the ExxonMobil Baytown's permits, air permits. And so the family wound up moving out of the area because it was so bad. But that gives you a flavor for, just in a 5-year period, how many pollutants and millions of pounds. The next slide. Summarizes the so-called upsets or emission events, they like to call them, but they're illegal events where they're dumping a lot of chemicals into the air. And did we know the totality of these events? No. The plant, we are convinced, did not report all of these. There could be many more, 2-3 times as many, maybe smaller events, but they were underreporting thresholds, is what ExxonMobil claimed. So that gives you a flavor that there's a lot of problems at these plants where they exceed their permit limits and they're dumping chemicals into the air at enormous rates. The next slide. So this slide just highlights a few of the pollutants that they emit. The criteria pollutants are regulated, but again, we don't have perfect numbers by any means. They're just guesstimates, and that's what goes into these inventories. But a lot of volatile organic chemicals, some of that are carcinogenic, like benzene and other benzene type compounds. And flaring is a big issue, where they have these large open-tipped burners that smoke and emit a lot of pollution. That's where a lot of the pollution came from, with flaring events. And then I would just mention that, next slide, please, that in terms of hazardous waste, this is another area where there's a lot of sham recycling. There's been incineration of this material, which does not all burn up, and it creates a lot of toxins. There's also dumping in these RCRA landfills in drums supposed to be last for 10,000 years. There's also deep injection wells, and some claims of recycling, if it's not too toxic. But so what is the hazardous waste? It's mixtures of highly toxic chemicals that the plants cannot break down, and they can only burn it maybe in a regulated hazardous waste incinerator. But this is one of the real downsides of plastics manufacturing, is hazardous waste production. Next slide. Okay, let's go on. I've already covered that. And one of the reasons, by the way, okay, that we have a lot of this problem with landfilling and burning of wastes, garbage, plastics, hazardous waste, because in 1988, Congress passed the Ocean Dumping Ban Act and said, stop putting all this stuff into the ocean. So EPA had to come up with some solutions. Landfilling, they pushed for landfill expansions all across the U.S., new landfills, incineration of so-called non-hazardous waste material, but even a lot of hazardous waste. So this is something that myself and other folks have been fighting across the U.S. is new incinerators, hazardous waste incinerators, because these will emit cancer-causing chemicals, ones that change the DNA, ones that cause birth defects, neurotoxins, immunotoxins. It's really pretty crazy that the EPA would push this. Next slide, please. So what about ExxonMobil's, claim of, advanced recycling? Well, they are not identifying all the types of plastics and the volumes that they are putting into their pyrolysis process, which they claim is a new process. So that information is missing. We don't know what their outputs are. And next slide, please. And also, third is that they're using a pyrolysis process, which heats up these plastics, and that takes a lot of energy to produce that pyrolytic heat, and that's going to cause some degradation of the materials. But we don't know, how much heat is they're using. Finally, I'll just say that ExxonMobil is continuing with massive scale plastics manufacturing compared to the tiny scale of its recycling. About 5 years ago, I was part of an effort to oppose ExxonMobil's new ethylene cracker. They already had at least one or two more, and we were very concerned about the pollution, okay, coming from this process. And so, but we lost, and so Exxon went ahead, built it. So they are not just, making huge amounts of plastics, they're increasing the amounts. Let's see. Anything else? So anyway, so Exxon did claim in December 2023 that its process would be capable of handling 80 million pounds of plastics a year. But there's a lot of skepticism about this, and I think the real question is maybe this is just a public relations scam by ExxonMobil. They're going to do this not only at Baytown, Texas, but Beaumont, Texas, just 60 miles east. I've been there. They've got another giant complex of two big chemical plants and a refinery. And I've been working with the Black community there. And in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I've been there. And again, they've got two giant chemical plants and a large refinery. So they claim that they're going to be doing this so-called recycling at all of these plants they've got. So anyway, Exxon says that used plastic is jointly processed with other feedstocks to produce product range such as, quote, new plastics, chemicals like butyl rubber, and transportation fuels. I'm very concerned about all the whatever toxicity that's going to come from what they're doing, because they're not really disclosing the potential harm that I think is going on. And I'll just say too, when we filed our lawsuit in 2010 for 16,000 violations of the Clean Air Act, the Exxon Mobil fought us very strongly, and we had a trial in 2014 where the company admitted that they, yes, they told the federal judge that we did have over 16,000 violations of our permits under the Clean Air Act, but we spent several $billions to try to reduce the number of violations, and we said they should have spent many billions of dollars to try to clean up these dirty plants, and that includes the plastics complex that they've got there at Baytown. Anyway, thank you very much. I applaud all the speakers for going into these issues, because I'm not really involved in it, but I'm aware of a lot of the chemistry, and it's really pretty outrageous that all this is going on. That the artificial turf should be completely banned, and they should all be removed across the U.S. I think how we dispose of them, that's another big question, because this is very toxic material. Thank you very much.